So Claire, great to have the opportunity just to chat. I know that the majority of your life for the last couple of years has been focused on one project. Just tell us how you're feeling about that project, which is obviously this wonderful book that we're looking forward to being published. How are you feeling now that it's sort of almost there?
Well, it's been one of those things where the book has been gestating for quite a long time. I think we go right the way back. I think even before you came as Warden, I remember you talked to me about the blog I was running, 100 Radley Objects. And you said, I think we met on the stairs in the mansion, and you said you thought it was one of the best things about Radley before you came. So it's been really quite interesting to pull that together and turn it into a book. And what I've really appreciated also is that opportunity to bring a different voice into institutional history.
And I mean, and sort of, because we've obviously tried to do this slightly differently. It isn't sort of the normal history book that all schools have, and when we've got our own copies of in previous years. I mean, how would you summarise that? What's the sort of difference from your perspective?
I think in part, I could go really politically correct and sort of say that as a woman, I'm speaking from the point of view of the oppressed minorities. But maybe not. Well,
I hope not entirely. I mean, probably Radley is a bit of a masculine place for obvious reasons, but it does bring a different voice down. I mean, let's just pause there for a moment, because in a sense, that is one of the things that's different about this book, isn't it? Mm. So just tell us how that perspective has perhaps changed your view of the process.
I think so, because it's made me look for the gaps in the records. So it's very much a history which is written through those silences. A lot of what I've done, as you know, when I've been looking at, say the history of women teaching at Radley or the history of the medical centre, is that the records, they're just omitted from the grey book. And so analysing that kind of way we think about ourselves as a college and who is included in separate lists, I sort of say, this person is missing. Suddenly we get the matron, Sister Body, is now listed in the Grey Book there among the members of Common Room or among the members of staff.
So you can sort of shape, as a result, we can perhaps now trace the development of things and ideas at Radley in a way that we perhaps haven't been able to do before. And the other great thing about that is it's obviously valuable just in and of itself of that, but as a result, some fantastic stories and themes have emerged that perhaps we wouldn't even have thought about.
Yes, there are whole chapters that are coming up, which I'm seeing now beginning to be discussed by other school archivists on various sort of email groups and so on. Things like the role of animals, the role of women, the community, the wives and the children who are living here, but also our approach to landscape, and then bringing that right the way into our modern approach where we're thinking about sustainability. So rather than writing out a history of education, it really has been those sort of things which have been untold.
And so as you think, as you perhaps sort of went through the process, I mean, was there anything that inspired you? Was there anything similar elsewhere that made you think this is what we want to do, or is it just very much?
As far as I'm aware, I have to admit that I don't spend my time reading other school history books.
I thought perhaps that was your bedtime reading, Claire. But
exactly. But as far as I'm aware, this is actually a unique approach as a school history, and I'm hoping, therefore, that we're actually setting a trend and also presenting another way of looking at institutional histories.
And as you sort of finish it, and as you look back on that process, what are you proudest of in terms of, obviously the way that it's come together as a work?
One of the things I think is that we now have a really good handle on our history. There's obviously an awful lot more of the book that hasn't made it into the physical object that's going to be in front of people. There are some wonderful stories there, but there are a lot of other things that we've had to leave out that we're now beginning to use in other ways. But that fact that we've actually got a really solid piece of research behind us, so that anything that comes up we can move on to. So I'm talking next week with head of drama, Victoria Booth, about the fact that the centenary of our drama society is coming up in 2 years' time. And the material is there ready. We can begin to engage with what we've got.
So, I guess certainly from my perspective, having looked through it and sort of having written little bits myself, it's exciting to sort of find themes that are actually new in one sense, but also that they go right from the outset, and sometimes exciting things that go back much further than we thought they might, like the drama at the college or whatever. But as we sort of think about the founders, so I write at the start, and it's almost trying to put myself in the same position as Sill and Singleton right there at the outset. I mean, what do you think they think of the book now, 175 years on? And would they see the themes that they cared about sort of going through their history? Obviously, things have changed massively, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
I was working yesterday through some of Singleton's papers, the first Warden, and the letters that he's writing to Sewell about whether it's sustainable to be both a college and a school, and where they're engaging right at the very beginning with their principles. They're trying so hard to maintain those 4 principles of collegiality, Christianity, privacy, and beauty and the aesthetic. And I think they would recognize quite a lot of what we've done, but I don't think they would have any concept of the size of place that we're dealing with. There was a little sketch in Singleton's papers, which actually is the first time I've ever seen "This must be burnt" written on something.
Okay.
It hasn't been. You get that Victorian "burn my papers after I die."
Yeah.
And what it was actually a plan, his ideal plan of how the college would look.
Okay.
Before, and they're renting the land for only 20 years. Every building they put up was temporary. And here he is doodling away, thinking, well, we're going to have a long corridor here, and the chapel is right here at the heart of it. Seems to have completely ignored the mansion. It just doesn't appear on it. But very much, what would an ideal school be like? And I thought it was really sad that he said, burn this one.
Well, at least we're glad that he didn't. His instructions weren't followed, because if obviously we'd taken that approach, we wouldn't have had a lot of all the stories that we have. I mean, I think one of the things I love about it is both the sense of newness that comes through, new innovations coming through at various points, and new projects and exciting new ideas, changing society. There's so many new things that perhaps have been hidden come to light. But equally, there are these themes that work through, and I can sort of still say as Warden now that there is something that very much a train through those 175 years. That's picked up by the book, I think, in a way that traditional histories don't, because they just record what happened after what happened after what happened. But I think it was a brilliant idea, just trace these 4 themes through. Do you have, of those 4 themes, do you have a favourite? Is one of those sort of 4 principles the one you've enjoyed looking at the most?
I was very much drawn to the chapter about beauty, the aesthetic, the landscape, how we've used that, the architecture. That particularly appealed to me when I was writing it. Just the story of individual trees, how they come to be here, how we have different avenues around, and what we do to maintain that landscape. And I was actually quite proud of myself, because one of the key problems always, the school obviously has a massive sporting history. And one of the issues always is where do you fit sport into a school history? Yeah. And in our previous histories, it's always been an appendix tucked on at the back, it's kind of the back page of the newspaper sort of thing. But actually looking at it, and looking at actually the founders, what Singleton and Sewell were both talking about, the beauty of the human body, the beauty of physical exercise. Sewell's little plan has a very large area labeled playground. Yeah. And Singleton's plan, sorry. And Sewell, of course, talked about your playground, your other chapel. And so I was quite pleased that we actually fitted sport into that chapter on beauty rather than putting it to one side.
I think that's great, isn't it? Actually, and perhaps we shouldn't have called Big Side Big Side. Perhaps we should have called it Playground. So remind me, why is it called Big Side? Do we know that?
I think purely because it's where the big boys play.
Okay. Well, I don't know whether it's very big in itself. Perhaps we should, as a 175 moment, we should rename it Playground. The boys would probably object. The boys would probably object to that. I like the point about the aesthetic actually myself. I mean, I love the word collegiality. I think the word collegiality to me is, I love the fact that we're called Radley College and that whole sort of collegiate thing. But I agree. I think in some ways the aesthetic is the thing that distinguishes the approach to setting up a school more than, and obviously chapel's hugely, the Christianity side is hugely important, collegiality is hugely important, and privacy as well. But I think the aesthetic is the thing that, to me, distinguishes Sewell and Singleton and their ideas. Would you agree with that?
I think so. What I liked was the constantly recurring word civilization and civilizing. So with the aesthetic, the idea is that if you give the boys beautiful things and beautiful surroundings, they won't trash them. They will actually learn to be civilized through those things. And I'm really pleased that the Shells have just done a whole art series, which they put up in Covered Passage, of famous old Radleyans or contemporary old Radleyans. And one of the ones they chose was Tim Stewart Smith, the gardener, who, and I know from interviews that I've seen on television that Radley probably had some sort of influence on him, not a direct one, but it must have fed through into the kind of work that he does.
And it's good that, isn't it, as well, because sort of a work like this doesn't need to focus on the very famous people as well. So it's the ones that perhaps wouldn't necessarily be known about in the way that, with due respect to Andrew Strauss, would be known about, or Peter Cook, or whatever the sort of the obvious names are. I mean, beautiful things have always been at the heart of Radley. This isn't the only book that will be a beautiful book. Tell us a little bit about the Gold Book and other such objects.
Well, the gold and the silver books are one of those things that every time I bring them out of storage, everybody falls around and says, why don't we have these out permanently on display and we can look at them? And what I really like about them is that they go back to a conversation before the school was founded, where Singleton and Sewell are talking about reward and punishment. And schools at the time in the 1840s are very heavy on punishing for all sorts of reasons. But the idea that you have a rising tariff of reward and that good work is public. So the Gold Book eventually became what we now call copies. Yeah. So we've got this magnificent bound book, which was originally put out in chapel, displayed in chapel. Here it is. It's got a 17th century binding. On the front, this shows King David and the showbread.
I'm sure Radley and Old Testament knowledge will be sufficient that you don't even need to tell them that.
So on the back, it's Moses and the manna, but David and the showbread here on the front. And the idea is that the boys who had done exceptional work, mostly at this time, they would be translating something like translating Shakespeare into perfect Greek verse. So here we've got Geoffrey Adams' one from 1915. And this is an original composition by him in Greek. And he himself has copied it perfectly into the book. And the book then just sat on display for everyone to see how wonderful this piece of work was. And we still have the idea that we reward top academic work. We call it a copy. And that's where it comes from, this Gold Book. And the Silver Book is the next stage down. That's about conduct and actions and ways in which boys distinguish themselves. And that, of course, gives us our contemporary reward for a distinction, which can be now for all sorts of good academic work, but also good sportsmanship, a good performance, good work in social, all sorts of things they can win a distinction for. And
it's a fascinating thing, isn't it? Because boys, they know the Radley language of lots of different things, and they sort of know what it means, but it sort of gives a richness and history and origin to it, to know where copies come from, or distinctions come from. And it probably also, it's sort of a pattern through, you know, Sill and Singleton's expected behaviour of boys, and obviously we now have the code of conduct, don't we, where we get boys to sign something when they first arrive at the college, and in some ways that's a new thing. We only introduced that, I can't remember, what, 4 years ago, something like that. But actually it wasn't new in one sense, because it was just picking up the same sort of themes that Sill and Singleton would always, I guess, have cared about.
I think so. I mean, looking at the first address to prefects when Singleton first set up the prefects in 1851, what he said was that they are there to enforce college discipline and to maintain civilized behaviors. So that word civilization coming through again in how the prefects relate to each other. And what is against college discipline is anything he describes as a breach of good conduct or of good manners. And those are our school rules. It's either good manners or good conduct.
I mean, probably we failed slightly in the 21st century. I think we got down to 10 points. We didn't quite get down to 1 or 2. But it is interesting because often I think, you know, when you sort of think about what we expect, we sort of make this and this and this. But actually it comes down to sort of fundamental basics. And it's good to be reminded of that, actually. Pretty much that covers it, doesn't it? Good conduct, good manners.
Good conduct, good manners.
Everything else sort of like comes from that.
Yeah. And then that other thing, protecting each boy's privacy.
Yeah, and that's an interesting theme, probably the theme where sort of quite a lot of new things are thought about in the book, isn't it? And you know, I sort of sense for you that was an important part of the process, perhaps going back to our original point about the unspoken voices and the things that made sort of, you know, the things that perhaps challenged Radley at various times in its history.
Yes, that element of how do you maintain privacy, and for you as a headmaster, that must be one of the hardest areas, is to maintain an element of personal dignity for the boys living in a boarding environment. Yeah,
it's trying to get that. And again, I think coming back to the individuals that are mentioned in the book as a whole, it's trying to maintain both the best of individuality, where boys can be themselves, develop their own skills, their own passions, their own characters, their own personalities. But at the same time, that collegiality, that you want them to do that in an environment which is together and thinking about other people. So trying to balance the best of individuality, but without the selfishness that might come with that, and the best of collegiality without perhaps the homogeneity that can all too easily come from that. And so I think that's always a challenge for a school. It's a challenge in 2022, just like I guess it was in 1847. And that's almost an encouragement to me, that although the manifestations of the problems are different from one era to another, the problem's probably actually in some ways still the same. You're sort of asking the same questions in different contexts at different times.
Yes. I mean, I like the fact that for Singleton, privacy could be maintained purely inside a desk. That's the place where a boy can be private, whatever he keeps in his desk, and nobody else. And I guess, you know, the college wouldn't have been able to give single rooms to every boy at that point in time, and I'd probably now come. But exactly the same principle, isn't it? That you know, sometimes we're dealing with boys who perhaps just think it's okay to go in somebody else's room without, you know, knocking on the door before and going, you know, and it's just basic principles of privacy like that are hugely important, and privacy of thought and privacy of ideas as well, and not being forced to be a particular type of person, a particular type of attitudes. You know, that's something, again, I think, you know, arguably it's dangerous in a boarding school environment where there's an element in which every boy would expect to be the same, and that's something we're always fighting against. And it's good to know that's happened throughout the college's history. Have you got any? I suppose this is a sort of easy question to ask and a difficult question to answer. What's your favourite of all the sort of stories in the book? Is there sort of one particular? My personal favourite is actually, particularly in the middle of a pandemic, is looking at all the sort of illnesses happened in the past. So the one about cholera, I think, back in the 1860s, shows that everything comes round. I'm sort of thinking COVID is unique, and in some ways it isn't. It is, but you know, the college has faced those problems before, so I was encouraged by that. What about you? Well, I feel when you're writing, if you have a sentence in your own writing, which makes you well up with tears every time you read it. That to me is the line. And a couple of years back, a very elderly gentleman came to see me called Alan Dodson, who was evacuated here at the age of 9 years old. He was the son of the dairymaid, the grandson of the live-in cook. And he was here just by himself as a child. And somebody gave him a one-eyed beagle as a pet. And he was sitting here talking to me in the coffee shop and just glowing with the effect of having his dog, the first dog he'd ever owned, and being free of all of Radley's grounds, just the two of them. And that just tiny little story of a moment of a 9-year-old who's not a Radleyan, but he's part of the place.
I think it's, I mean, actually, I'll be absolutely honest with you, Claire. When I first saw the list of chapters that were going to sort of form, you know, and I saw the chapter on pets, I thought, really? A chapter on pets? And I'd agree with you entirely that the most, I mean, it's the funniest, it's the most interesting, it's the warmest of chapters. And actually, I think in almost one moment, reversed my entire attitude to the whole book, actually. I expected the big chapters on chapel and the big chapters on music or whatever to be the ones that sort of stuck out. And actually, I think the book does what it says on the tin, really. It is Untold Stories, because you wouldn't have thought of stories about pets, and that's just one of them. It's a lovely chapter. And I think it does sort of discover some of the spirit and the personality of the school that's far beyond just simply the provision of education to a group of boys at any one time. So no, I think it's a lovely chapter. And we had to cut some things. You said earlier, we had to, you know, Simon, I know, and you and others had to sort of like be fairly ruthless with numbers of words. But I'm really glad the pet chapter stayed in. I suspect every other chapter would have had to go before we'd have ended up with one chapter about pets and a load of nice pictures.
We would have done. I think the first chapter I sacrificed was actually about exams.
It's a good priority, isn't it? It's a reminder that boarding schools aren't all about the utilitarian nature of passing exams. They're about people and personalities. Great, it's lovely. It's lovely to chat, and you know, I really hope people enjoy the book as much as I've done, in the sense that it's just a book to. I mean, of course, you can read it from end to end, but it's just a book to dip into and genuinely discover, I think, the soul of the college through stories. So, thank you for what you've done. Great to chat about it.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to write it, actually.
Well, I mean, it's
relatively freely.
Well, it's lovely that you were able to do it in the way that you wanted to, and it's lovely to have been able to contribute as well. So let's hope everybody enjoys it as much as we have.